Hello. Today I'm not painting. Today I am actually talking about gluing together miniatures. And I thought I would do this without painting, just so my hands would be free. I'm not actually going to be gluing together stuff for reasons that'll become obvious. So basically, Reaper, who I get most of my minis from, they've had, I think they're on their fifth Kickstarter, possibly their sixth. They've had a Kickstarter out every year and a half, so I've been supporting all of them. So, um, yeah, I have about 5 or 6 years worth of, actually closer to 7 or 8 years perhaps, of miniatures, which I haven't painted yet, just because I've been getting into Kickstarters and I haven't been painting them all. Some of it's just I look at it, I just don't feel like I want to paint this figure, or I'm interested in something else right now, so I'm going to look for other things to paint. And other reasons is some of them need to be glued together, and I have nothing against gluing together miniatures. It's just it can get difficult, and when I first started painting them, it was harder to do. Now that they're doing, they're casting them in plastic now rather than doing them all in metal. It's gotten to be a little easier. So I just thought I'd talk about gluing these together. So right now, basically, I took all the ones from the various Kickstarters I backed. So these will say, ready to be painted. And what they mean when they say that is, does not need to be primed. You don't need a coat of primer. You can go ahead and start painting. However, they cast these in molds, and in order to be able to remove the figure from the mold, they spray the inside of the mold with a non-sticking material, your non-stick spray that you'd put on a cooking pan or something like that. And sometimes a little residue of that gets left on the outside of the miniature, and paint doesn't want to stick to that. So I will take not a paintbrush, a old toothbrush, and I will scrub these down. And of course, now they're wet. Those with the castings, they got little holes in them, little indents, which the water gets in, and it's hard to dry out. And so I will leave them sitting out to dry. Put them on a towel. I would have them in the sun, but it's a rainy day now, so they aren't in the sun. So I just have them on a towel waiting to dry. Of course, we have all this stuff that needs to be glued together. I have to be careful not to kick the towel and have parts from one mini mixed with parts of another. So that's one of the reasons is when you glue stuff together, you sort of only want to do one piece at a time. Otherwise, if you start to mix and match pieces from different minis, you're going to make a mistake. However, a tube of glue, once you open it, it starts to go bad. Bad's not the right word, but if you want to use all the glue, then you have to use it quickly, within a week or so of opening the tube. I'm talking super glue. I put finger quotes because super glue is a brand name. It is not the actual. I don't know what your type of glue is called, but we generally say super glue. It's like Xerox machine, even though Xerox is a brand name. Rollerblade, even though that's a brand name. It's one of those things where we say super glue even if we aren't using the particular brand. This isn't your obvious school glue that you would use. This is the more sticky stuff. So like I said, once you open a tube of that, you want to use as much of it as possible so that it doesn't go bad on you. And so, like I said, you have the choice of preparing a bunch of things, not getting the pieces mixed and matched together, and using a bunch of glue all at once, or doing them one at a time and risking wasting glue. And so it's one of those things. Like I said, that's just, I don't like to waste materials. So I at this crossroads of how do I do this. So right now I've got about 20 to 30 miniatures spread out on a towel downstairs, waiting to be glued together because I've scrubbed them down, made sure I got any extra residue off them from the casting, and I have this stuff all downstairs and waiting to be glued together. And I'm just hoping I don't kick something and accidentally mix and match things. I got stuff spread out enough. I think I can figure out what belongs to what. But so now I'm going to talk about gluing. So, like I said, back when things were done with metal, sometimes, if you needed to glue a piece together, sometimes there would be like a little nub on one part and a little hollow spot, and they would fit together, and if you had a good brand of glue, you could get it to hold. If not, then you might have to pin it. And pinning would be, you would take your miniature and you take a small drill, and you would drill a little hole in it. And then you take the piece you're going to attach to it and drill a little hole in that. And then you put like a small piece of metal, just a little, bit of paper clip works if you got a good sized paper clip or whatever. And it's basically you're just gluing one end into one hole, putting a dab of glue on the other end and putting the other hole to it. And now your two pieces, they have a little rod between them holding them in place. And that's a good plan because so the old super glue commercials, you got the guy hanging from by the hard hat, and they glued his hard hat to a I-beam and he's hanging on to it. Super glue and these other brands of glues, they're good against pulling apart. They are not good against shearing. So if I have these glued together like this, if I hit it hard enough, I can knock this off. I can't pull them apart, but I can shear them. So pinning, you're getting glue on more surfaces, and so these, like I said, you've got the shearing, but you've also got the pulling, and you got one hit isn't going to take it apart as easily because you got multiple surfaces glued. So when they started doing these plastic moldings, they would do things, and they started to like specially shape some of the holes on these. And so the piece would fit in there, and so you could get a good glob of glue in the hole. It's going to cover the end, it's going to cover around here, so it's not just going to pull apart. We don't have the shearing to worry about. We've got glue on multiple surfaces within this holding it together, so it's going to hold together fairly well. This actually holds well. That's wrong. Some of these hold fairly well without glue, but you do want to glue them eventually. And so, like I said, when they started doing the plastic miniatures, they started doing that, and it made it easier. You didn't have to pin stuff because some of them were made, and some of these they even shaped them. So I got two wings here, but the holes, they're shaped differently, so it's easier for me to tell which wing goes where, and I don't have to try to figure out how to put the puzzle together as much as I would if I was pinning it myself, with a drill. So that made gluing stuff together became fairly good or easier, but we still have the some problems with it, like use of glue. Like I said, I decided I'm finally going to glue all this stuff together from all these Kickstarters, so I got them all sitting down, downstairs waiting to dry, so that I can just get one or two tubes of glue and be done with it. Still not going to paint them all right away because again, I'm going to paint things I feel like painting. So, other problems we're having. So, this is called a sprue. Sprue originally for casting and manufacturing, sprue was the hole that you poured your material in, and you got your mold. It's got a hole to pour the material in, and that hole was called the sprue. Now, a little extra would form around the hole, so that became known as sprue material. Then we get a verb known as sprue, or sprueing, which is basically to cut away this little extra material. Then people started to make castings like this, where they got multiple parts and they're all held together, and so this little bit in the middle became known as sprue, because again, so go back a few, 20, 30, 40 years, and they will make, this is the figure, this is the sprue. But now in modern times, we just call the entire thing, this is a sprue. And so, like I said, cutting away, so when I cut this apart, or some of this is made so it can be broken apart without being cut. That's called, so I will take this and I will sprue the pieces off it, because I will, as a verb, cut away the sprue. A little confusing there. As I was looking that up, I found out sprue was also a tropical disease, which was discovered in 1759 in the Barbados by William Hillary. We still don't know what causes it, although we assume it's bacterial, or the preventive measures for it make it look like it's bacterial. There is also sprue asparagus, which is the earliest growings. This is what you would pick away to thin your asparagus. I'm thinking that comes from casting. The idea of you're getting rid of the unwanted bits, you're spruing your asparagus. I could be wrong on that, but couldn't find that out. Just a little educational sidebar there, and I'll go back to what I was talking about now. Now, some of these come with multiple sprues. And so this has got the base here, and this guy would stand in the base. So I'll glue them there. Then now break this off, break that off. His weapon's in one piece, so you would glue, one arm goes there, one arm goes there. So he's holding it in two hands. So I have to glue that on to his arm separately. Like I said, one of the sprues is attached to his arm, so I can't demonstrate it. Then, whoops, drop that. You got this little extra part coming off the base. His head was on there, and so that gets glued on. And so this is another problem with doing these is, like I said, some of these sprues can just be twisted off rather than cut off. And thankfully these were all in the same plastic bag. So when this broke off in transport, which sometimes they do, it was still in the same bag. So I was able to find the head without having to go back and dig through a whole box of stuff. I found it easily. Now I just have to keep it with these two pieces. So like I said, that's one thing. I got all the stuff downstairs. I need towel. And I just got to make sure that these two pieces in the head all stay next to each other. Otherwise, when it comes time to actually start gluing stuff together, I'm going to have to dig through a pile of parts and try to find what I'm looking for. Okay, so this, I think this is supposed to be a griffin. I held it up earlier. So I basically glued his arm on. This is stuff I'd scrubbed yesterday. I glued his arm on yesterday, and I glued him to the base. Then I got these wings that I was going to put on, and that's another thing here is these are very large. And so I don't know how off balance this is going to get with the wings actually on it. So I'm going to end up basing the blade, taking the base, basing it onto another thing so it's got a little weight to it. That way when I glue the wings on, he's not falling over and things aren't breaking off. And that's also another thing is sometimes we put these together and we realize, wait a second, I'm going to have to reach a paintbrush in there somehow. And how do I do that? And so sometimes, like I said, in this case, the wings were done separately just because they couldn't cast it as one piece with the wings on. So they took the wings separately. So I can paint this no problem. There are other pieces where, we glue them together and then suddenly we realize, wait a second, I'm going to have to somehow reach a paintbrush past this and up into his armpit or whatever. And so that's another thing. Sometimes you have to sit down and think, should I paint part of this, then glue it together later, and then maybe touch up my painting as necessary. I generally don't like to paint before I glue because I know I'm going to ruin the paint job that I did. But sometimes you look at these and you think it's going to be easier to do it that way. Other things. So some of these actually come unsprued. So we got this little pumpkin beholder creature. It's just or jack-o'-lantern with a bunch of faces and weird eyes. And this did not come attached to sprues. This was all in one plastic bag. And I just brought this one because this is one, there's like 3 or 4, 6, 7 different parts to this. So I got to figure out how to put it together. So before I even get the glue out, I'm going to want to take this and I'm going to, okay, there's this wedge back here and there's this thin part on the stem and that fits together. And I might want to glue this right away or I might want to set it aside. This is going to go in the base. So it's got a base. This will fit together nicely. I just got to figure out which direction it turns. Okay, we're at a point now I'm going to have to decide, do I want to put some weight on the base before this starts to fall over. Then we got all these other little bits, other vines with pumpkins on them. And I've got to look at all these other little holes here and I got to figure out which one goes where and does this fit into that or how does this go together. So before I start gluing this, I want to actually figure out how it goes together. 3 pieces I figured out easily enough. The rest of these I'm going to have to sit down and try to decide, what little knob on this fits into what little slot on here. Then I got to lay them out so that I can remember them when it comes time to glue them. This is another thing, I don't like to glue things together because sometimes it's a puzzle which you put the puzzle together, then you have to take the puzzle apart and lay the pieces out so that you know how to put it back together again. So, again, I think this is going to be a fun piece to paint, but it's just getting it together is going to be difficult in the long run. Pieces are big. It was easy to scrub, and like I said, the ridges in it are big enough, the holes and all that. I should be able to figure out how to do it. It's just a matter of once I get the glue open, I want to make sure I know how things go. And the last problem I have is some of these, like this one here. This has some weird parts, like got a little base to it, and his feet go in the base, and then this goes on to there, and then his head goes on. And we're looking at parts here which are almost as small as the bead of glue that I'm going to be using to hold them in place. And so I've got to be very careful not to over glue things. When I go to put his feet on here, I mean the bead of glue is going to run over the side of the holes. So now I got to be careful not to accidentally glue the base down to something, not to get it glued to my fingers, not to do all this, because basically I'm going to be holding it like this as I try to put the feet on. And my thumb is going to be very close to where the glue is going to be spilling over. So I'm going to be accidentally gluing my hands to this, accidentally gluing my fingers together. One good thing about most super brand style glues is, even though people talk about accidentally gluing their hands together and stuff, which I have done several times, it's really, you just have to, like I said, shearing force. All you got to do is rub your fingers together and it'll loosen. And it's an irritant and all this other stuff you got to worry about, but it's not as bad as accidentally gluing your hand to the figure, which, again, you can shear it off, but that's just embarrassing. You're trying to hold this together to put another piece on, and suddenly you can't put this down. And that was the main thing I got, is some of these, especially I think with Kickstarter 3, they just made a bunch of them like this, where they just had these really small parts, and it's like the head's about the same size as the glob of glue you're going to put on, and how do you put this together without gluing your hands together and all that. But I will muddle through it. Some of these, like I said, the next group of paintings I'm doing, I'm not going to include any of these I'm gluing together now, but you're going to see these come up in the future. Some of them will be properly glued. And that's all. Just wanted to discuss gluing stuff together. And that's why I'm not painting. That's why, again, I'm not trying to glue things together as I talk. Otherwise, for sure, I would definitely have my hand stuck to stuff and, glue figures to the table by accident and stuff like that. So now I'm going to take these back downstairs and try to set them where I'm not going to mix them up with other parts, and hopefully tomorrow I will be ready to start gluing stuff together, and you will see some of these come up again in the future. And have a nice day.